My session is really about the things you should know already and the things you should be doing before you get to the stage to find out if you've been hacked or compromised. So a little bit about myself. My name is Adnan Hendricks. I'm a South African citizen, but I've been living in the Netherlands for a while. So I live here, I work globally. I'm also a Azure MVP. And you guys can follow me on Twitter, or later next week, you guys will be getting the slides anyway. So if you have any questions afterwards, you can always mail me or try to hack me. That has been done. So the basis for my session is really just to go over a couple of features or security features that's already existing within Azure, or at least see how it works in Azure. And some of the things that you guys should already be doing on premises, this sort of core IT principles that you need to do, good housekeeping. I was at in Helsinki in Finland, and I met this guy, Mikko Ipponen from F-Secure. We had a good chat because he gave a session. He's one of those TEDx speakers that talk about security, and he's always on the news. So we kind of both kind of know that, you know, you don't get 100% security. It just doesn't exist. You always got to do multiple pathways, multiple levels, etc. And the best bet, I'm from Africa, we always say you don't have to run faster than the lion. You just have to run faster than the guy that's next to you. So with security, it's pretty much the same thing. Okay? It doesn't matter, you know, nowadays, and I'll show you guys a couple of things that you've seen in the news as well. You know, because you don't get 100% security, just have enough. You know, try and get as much as you can, because in effect, a hacker really just needs time. So like you've seen with Martin, showing in Sentinel, sometimes these kind of attacks or vectors, these guys have been in the company's network for months. For example, with Mikko, we were discussing about a hack that happened in the UK. So it was actually two companies. The one company was trying to buy the other company, and the CEO, they were both kind of like buddies and friends and everything. And what happened was, there were hackers that were in the network for months. So they were monitoring emails, checking correspondence, and they kind of figured out, well, this guy, they're going to be selling the company somehow, and they just waited. And then one day, the one CEO sent, okay, an offer. This is what we're willing to pay, because the price had already been discussed. And then they said, well, they intercepted that email, changed, they left everything as is, they just changed things like the account number for the money transfer and that sort of thing. And then everything went through without being checked. So obviously afterwards, when they checked, they found out that they were compromised, and you know, things like Sentinel and a lot of other tools, it's getting harder and harder and harder. I'm sure you guys heard of the deepfakes, the videos, people making as if they are the CEO of a company. Hackers using things like AI. So the traditional stuff that you used to be using, you really have to use something else if you haven't been using cloud security, cloud type security. So luckily with Azure, it's pretty much secure from the get-go. And the nice thing about Microsoft and their cloud software is that the security is constantly evolving. Even if you look at Windows 10, that's the reason we get 2 versions of it every year. They just keep on reinventing the security vectors because the hackers are constantly coming up with new threats. And the nice thing about the new technologies, things like Azure Arc, the multiple management pathways for cloud, on-premises environments, edge environments, everywhere. Same thing if you're using Windows Server and Windows Admin Center, allows you to onboard certain servers into Azure. something I'll show you in a bit as well. So quite often companies are still dealing with these kind of challenges, like how they should be managing servers in the cloud and which services, encryption, etc. you should be using. Well, Microsoft's been doing a pretty good job on Azure to help with these challenges. So something that you guys have seen lately in the news is GWK hack, all because they didn't update their VPN. Could have been avoided. It was a vulnerability that was already made available for months, and by the time they patched it, it was already too late. So the idea here is you guys really need to pay attention to those zero-day hacks and vulnerabilities that are made aware, because there's a lot of things that we don't know about that's still out there. So you always got to go and think about the things that, hey, what am I missing? I mean, we almost were on the brink of war, the USA and Iran. And the thing is, the cyber war that they were talking about is actually ongoing for the past couple of years already. You know, this is nothing new. So if you look back to things like Stuxnet, it's been a couple of years ago when certain world organizations or groups aimed at the nuclear power plants in Iran to kind of like cause them to blow up. That's pretty much where you could say that kind of war started already. So there's a lot of things that's going on that we don't know about that kind of can have an impact on us as well. So that's just something that I want to show you guys that's closer to home. Anybody from the university here? So things like this is where the rumor is that they paid quite a large sum of ransom, but they're still struggling. So, you know, there's this talk about ransomware insurance nowadays, but my thing is, it's like a, you know, like a hostage situation. We can't really negotiate with terrorists, kind of thing. And with ransomware, pretty much the same. You never know after you paid if you're going to get your stuff back anyway. You know, sometimes it works. The stories that I've read, sometimes it doesn't. So big impact. I mean, a lot of their systems are still down. And it's my belief that if they had something as simple as just good backups that were off-site, things would have been okay. Especially even if they used Azure backup to back it up into a recovery services vault. But these kind of things start somewhere, right? So you guys probably have a lot of mails in your mailbox, just junk. Somebody out of nowhere, hey, you've won. Or the thing I got recently, you know, they try to play on your inquisitivity, your curiosity of human beings, that nature that we have, that we always want to know things, and that's also why you guys are sitting here, because you want to know about security, right? So I've got a mail, it's addressed to somebody else, there's a document, now I know better, but a lot of people, they're going to look and see, hey, let's see what's in there, and that's the problem. Links in phishing mails are clicked daily. Even if you have a good spam filter, there's always a few that come through. And the thing is, they just have to hit lucky once. Now, later on, I'll talk about things as what we can do and how you guys can go and protect yourselves. But this is pretty much the attack vector or timeline where the link is clicked, a backdoor is installed on a device, and this could be any kind of device, and then they go further and utilize privilege escalation to kind of get a hold and sometimes get help desk involved or some support person who RDPs to the box, and then they get domain admin if they're lucky. But hopefully I'm one of those guys that are totally against local admins, domain admins for everybody. And you guys too, right? Anybody still domain admin somewhere? Okay, the bad guys. Can be. Keyloggers, your sensitive data is compromised, and then they try and either copy the data or encrypt it. If you've got a nice Tor browser, you can find it on the dark web. And quite often, nowadays, the big threat is ransomware. Ransomware and, crypto mining or data mining. Because data is the new currency. Seems to pay, if I can go after the reports from Maastricht. So some of the things that companies still want to learn about, or really what they still want to find out how it works in a cloud way, is things like securely connecting to machines. Because if you have RDP open, anybody can just about walk in and get access to your data. Ensure that you have some sort of backup mechanism, not just for ransomware, but people make mistakes, right? Things like software updates. Look at the Pulse VPN situation. Anybody still on Windows 7, 2008 R2? It used to be XP 2003. I'm sure you have a valid reason. But I was surprised at the number of people that paid for the extended support. You know, you could just migrate it to Azure and still have support. So if you really have to do that. But my advice is old operating systems, you need to get rid of it, because hackers know everything there is to know about getting in. Actually, getting into Windows has also been a bit of a problem. If you know what our Windows stores, encryption, like your passwords, cached credentials, that sort of thing, it uses the DP API, and that's already been blown wide open because they managed to reverse engineer it. One major item of concern that everybody needs to know is what sort of configuration changes gets done on your machine. So that's something that I find maybe at the top, because you always want to know what's changed, and some of the things that I'll be showing you guys will answer all these questions on Azure. So to start off with, how do you securely connect to a virtual machine that's exposed on the internet? Well, this is one of the ways you could securely do that, utilizing Azure Bastion. It's generally available, and it's really a PaaS service that gets deployed into your virtual network, your VNet, in Azure. And instead of having public IPs for your virtual machines, you can get access to those virtual machines without having a public IP through the Azure portal, utilizing Azure Bastion to get access to them. So it provides a seamless method to connect to your virtual machines through RDP over a TLS or Internet HTML connection. Another way you could securely connect to virtual machines on Azure is by utilizing just-in-time VM access. It's pretty much the same method. You could say that support within Microsoft works, and other large IT companies, where that RDP connection is only open for the amount of time that the support person needs to do his work. So you don't need to have it open 24/7, because the minute you have a RDP port open, there's large groups of hackers and people that are just constantly scanning IPs, checking to see are they getting a return back. In fact, I just set it up, something up yesterday, the 8th, or anyway, I tried to access 2 RDP connections that I had. surprisingly, and it was just a few days that I had something new up and running. So ideally, even if you have a web or firewall, it can utilize just-in-time access through the firewall. So enabling the RDP connections or NSG rules on both of those. Backups in Azure. You can set up a recovery services vault in all your regions, apply policy management to specify which machines need to be backed up, how they need to be backed up. Depending on the agents or snapshots, it can either utilize a VHD or instant recovery snapshots and really just do the incremental blocks, so they're not copying the whole thing every time. So it's really easy to set up, and if you evaluate the cost, whereas your backup cost in terms of your incidental costs, if something would happen, as to say ransomware, this is a lot cheaper, and you'd sleep better at night. If you look at some of the prior hacks that happened, this could have prevented something simple. Because at most times, we do a lot of pen testing, and if something like DP API gets hacked on the domain, you pretty much have to start over, because it utilizes a domain certificate that you only get once. You can't like refresh it, you have to create a new domain, and then kind of create all the objects again and secure it in that way. So it does cost a lot of money and time, and quite often companies will see the benefit of having their infrastructure set up correctly in a good way. So these things, you can have encryption, and even your backup encryption keys, you can store that in the Azure Vault, making it more secure. So a lot of space to back up to 1,000 virtual machines. There's a lot of different ways you can update your virtual machines on Azure. Azure Update Management is one of the easiest ways. I remember a project where this was already available, and the company that I was doing the project with actually wanted us to still, for some reason, use System Center, Configuration Manager then. It's now Endpoint Manager. But this is available in Azure. It's allows you to do the same thing. Works with the MMA agent, and it can connect to WSUS or repo or public repository for Linux, and allow you to easily update that. So with the same workspace, you can verify compliance, assess if it needs updates, and just deploy the updates. So quite simple things that you can go and utilize by just enabling it on Azure. Inventory and change tracking. It's part of the System Center suite. Allows you to track software, registries, file changes on virtual machines. And because it utilizes the agent of System Center Security Center, you can even track non-clouds or on-premises on AWS, pretty much the same way Sentinel would be able to connect to these things through the Security Center. So some of these supported operating systems, you can see that the Server 2008 R2 still supported because of the extended support and that sort of thing. So no excuse to not take it. But kicking off to my first demo. So in my subscription, I have already created a Bastion host. So I've deployed this in my subscription, in my virtual network, and I've tied a few machines to that. And these, let's check a different one. This one has now these things don't need a public IP address, so they only require a private IP address within the subnet in that virtual network, and the PaaS service really just enables that connection. At the virtual machine, I can add in a username and my password to connect. And I've utilized a lot of different kind of jump host software, things that were really bad, where you could even see the credentials of the person that utilized the software before you. And that was in international projects. Unfortunately, it was before Azure Bastion host, so we just had to make deal with trust to get around that. So as you can see, it's within my browser, secure connection to my virtual machine. Like I said, if you do require direct connection through RDP with a public IP VM, you can still use the just-in-time virtual machine access. These two don't work together, unfortunately. I mean, there's still a call out to see that. So any virtual machine connected in that virtual network, you can access it through this, because on within your virtual network, RDP is allowed. It's a remote VM. It's in the cloud, so you got to get there somehow. Or you could decide we're going to set up site-to-site VPN, where you have an ExpressR connection, and you do it that way, which is more secure if you have it entirely closed off. But if you do have a requirement to access it publicly, this is the best option at the moment. So most of the times, these are the issues. When you're dealing with a cloud project, people are still worrying about confidentiality of the information, like loss of control of the data, because it's in the cloud, it's spread everywhere. It's either in Office 365, or they have it on storage accounts. They're thinking, who has access to your data? But we know that Microsoft has stringent rules as to when and how the engineers can access certain hardware. And even then, most of the times they don't know whose data or workloads are running on those hardware. If they do, you as a client have to give permission. Okay, so things like integrity, the privacy issues, the increased attack surface, because now all of a sudden you have workloads running in different clouds, different regions. Can the cloud provider employee be phished and somebody getting access to your data? And these are the different attacks or threats that you can come across. Most of the time, insecure configuration. Also a discussion that I had with Miko from F-Secure is that, you know, people will always make mistakes, and all vulnerabilities are really just bad written code. At least that's what it normally is. And those kind of situations will really be solved once things like AI starts writing code. I mean, all of you guys that do ARM templates know what I'm talking about. If it's in a script, if it's in a template, it's done. Every time it gets affected, it's the same thing. So things like exposed credentials, open entry points, and the different lateral movement, pretty much the same thing that Martin showed that you can go and effect. Something, like I said before, nothing is secure. Even if you think you got it figured out yourself, like this guy, also from Apeldoorn, where I live, is an IT expert, and it happened to him as well because of phishing. So I mentioned the rise of deepfakes. Credentials can be bought on internet, in fact databases. If you're aware of Toria Hunt's website, Have I Been Pawned? Just put in your email address and you'll see all the places that it's come up. I mean, every time I do a presentation, I put my Twitter handle, I put my email address, but I'm a bit secure. I know I got extra factors, so if somebody tries to access my data, I can get a message. Phishing and spoofing is still number one. It's even moved across to telephones, where through WhatsApp and people phoning and saying, hey, I've got a new phone, can you transfer a couple of bucks? And I mentioned the DP API. And all these things could have been prevented through 93%, according to the Internet Society. People that are still using deprecated protocols, too many global admins, no MFA or multi-factor authentication. Shadow IT, where Cloud App Security can help you with. And things like data loss prevention. Have you guys ever tried the Google hack? Where you just try to search for data on the internet? Sometimes you get bank account numbers, depending on where you look. Luckily in the Netherlands it's a bit tighter, but some countries, some parts of the UK are still bad. And we're living in the GDPR times. And you guys seen some of the hefty fines that some of these companies had to pay. So things, Cloud App Security, Azure Information Protection, wherever you can encrypt the data, try and do that. For those of you with Office 365, DLP is built in for email and also for your data. So the best thing since sliced bread in the cloud world is Azure Security Center. So cloud security is pretty much a shared responsibility, and quite often people that's getting into learning Azure, they don't know what to do. Azure Security Center is pretty much helps you with everything that you need to do to ensure that your security posture is improved. Things like privileged identity management that helps you with your administrator accounts. And Martin told you all about Azure Sentinel, which is great for finding out the attack method within your organization. And we always say you gotta change your mindset and think as if you already been hacked. What would you do? How would you go and find that? That's why a product like Azure Sentinel was bound to happen, and utilizing all that telemetry that's getting from Azure Security Center and the network. So threats in the wild, Bitcoin mining, data mining, slaves, another word that we use. People utilizing apps, things like TikTok, that some companies say or countries say aren't safe enough to utilize. So you got to check your software that you use. SQL injection when it comes to databases. Storage accounts, you have to always make sure that you can have it encrypted. Try and not use public access, and try and push it to an endpoint, a private endpoint, or to a specific machine or service. Containers as well. Sometimes they don't use role-based access control and app service side. So these are some of the things that I recommend, and I normally do in WorkWise. So the idea is if you're going to be working with something really important, such as Azure, or Azure AD, or you're going to be using Azure Security Center, anything that is pretty much a priority one in your organization, you have to use a privileged access workstation. So it really starts by securing the device that you use, that you're going to be managing your systems with. So whether you call it a POR or a SOAR, you decide, utilize MFA on that. The best method is to have a device locked down as the secure workstation and utilize your normal day-to-day machine in a virtual machine. Enable password hash shrink. Utilize identity protection. And anybody already moved over to passwordless or FIDO2 keys? That's more secure, blocking legacy authorization. But with all these things, like I said, you should try and get a mindset where you move towards zero trust model. So try and test utilizing things like conditional access, so that a service or an object needs to prove that it's compliant within the organization. So some more tips. You can encrypt your hard disk with Bitlocker. And the thing about Bitlocker, it's not really so much that it's the encryption, but it's also the integrity on the data, like the file integrity that I spoke about. And whenever you're moving towards a secure tiering model on Azure, you need at least 2 levels for the global admins, things like service admins or other owners, and work towards least privilege. So utilizing the role-based access control, and give just enough, and don't be like those guys where everybody is an admin. Whitelisting with Bitlocker. In cloud, we have adaptive application controls as part of the security center. I'll show it in a minute. And then the normal NSG rules, firewalls, IPsec. And I'm a big defender for blocking PowerShell for limited users. In the escalation for Sentinel, Martin showed you guys as well. PowerShell is the #1 thing. It's on the increase, and it's really part of Windows. So how can you protect against the operating system? So by blocking it for limited users, you can stop that first step in the threat where somebody's clicked on a link. And if you have things like Bitlocker or adaptive application controls and virtual machines, and you've blocked it for limited users, it prevents that. So that you're already like halfway won. So just to continue with the zero trust model, it's all about authenticating device and authorizing the action. So utilizing the identity, the service workload with conditional access policies, enforcing MFA if you don't suspect or trust the action. You can utilize things like Intune and conditional access within Azure AD. Windows Hello, biometrics, perfect with FIDO2 or tiering authentication for authorized systems. So to jump into my next demo. So just by going to Security Center, in my overview, it immediately, after I've already have mine set up, normally it will allow you to set it up by selecting your subscriptions and specifying the pricing and getting started. Now normally you can have a free 30-day trial for your subscription, but standard is pretty much where the if I go to pricing and settings, for example, my one subscription. So you get a lot of things free, So it will assess your environment, it will look at your entire workloads and give you advice on security within your workloads. But in standard, you can have the advanced controls, things like threat protection, the application control, just-in-time virtual machine access, all the things that I've already mentioned in the previous slides that really protects you from the first step. And then depending on the resources, whether it's virtual machines or app services, you can just enable or disable that depending on what your requirements are. Now, the only reason mine's disabled in this subscription for SQL Server is that I don't have SQL Server on a virtual machine. I'm using the app, the PaaS service. And that's already been enabled. So it's all about collecting that information and acting on that information. So by data collection, I can auto-provision the agent on the virtual machines to get that information, or I can manually install it. For example, if it's on Azure, I can automate it. If it's on AWS or on premises, I can just download the agent, install it locally, and it will start sending the data to Security Center. So I could specify a specific workspace. I can set up an email notification for alerting. Threat detection, if I want to allow Cloud App or Defender ATP to access my data and also utilize some findings. And also workflow automation, which is still in preview. I can enable workflow, apply a logic app, and do some remediation on certain alerts. So going back to my overview, the nice thing that it does, it gives you a secure score based on your security settings that have already been applied out of different kinds of organizations and standards that have similar setup. So I can go and review my score, have a look and see what else I still need to do depending on the resource that I have to increase my security posture within my subscription. And I've disabled a few things, and it just gives me advice on what I can do, and I can drill down, evaluate the threat, what kind of threat, what's the risk, what remediation steps do I have to do, and how do I have to enable that. So pretty much anybody that doesn't know anything about Azure, that's maybe just doing stuff off a course or something, or the docs.microsoft.com, who's still learning, can just have a look at this, and it basically tells you what to do to make yourself more secure. So pretty much security for dummies. A lot of my resources on the graphs and dashboards, I can just drill down and evaluate so looking at some of my recommendations, it's quite a lot because this is one of my demo accounts. But normally for a company, you'd want to have at least, depending on your requirements, I know that some companies can't have certain settings enabled because they just do it in a different way, so they're still covered. But a lot of these actions have quick fixes, where instead of just the information on how to do it, you can just click on a button and it gets remediated for you with a quick fix. So quite easy to do. So based on the different resources, virtual machines, networking, things like you forgot to close the NSG rule or disable something. Things for IoT, in fact, all different kinds of workloads. But where it gets fun is the advanced cloud defense. And that's pretty much the reason why you want standard. The adaptive application controls. So it's basically Bitlocker, but for your cloud environment. And it pretty much puts everything so no alerts, rules you can go and edit, rules you can go and add by adding the vendor of the software or the path or hashes on the what.
Do you use this in a production environment?
Yes.
Because we tried it and it's a horrible thing to maintain. Or we had too many changes going.
It's the viewpoint or perspective that companies have. It can be a bit daunting in the beginning. The idea is, you see, we've been working with Bitlocker on client for a while, and the idea is to start small. And every time it's always safer to whitelist than to blacklist, because otherwise you never know what you needed to list. You know what needs to run. So in this way, you can go and add things if you see it doesn't work. But it's better than the alternative. So just my advice would be to stick in there. It's sometimes difficult when people are running a lot of different kinds of software on one machine. So setting up just-in-time virtual machine access. You can go and have a look at the machine, try and connect it. Oh, it's not running, but it was running, it stopped. If I try to connect it and I haven't enabled my just-in-time VM access, it won't access it because my RDP is closed. It's like taking away the lock on the door. The door's still there, but I can't open it. And I can go back and edit and access my machine and request access. Etc. Put in a justification and open the port. I've got auto shutdown on, so it shut down on me. One of the interesting options in security is the file integrity monitoring. So based on the workloads running in your Azure environment, yeah, you can list specific machines or workspaces with specific machines and specify, well, I don't have any file changes at the moment, but this is the dashboard, if you will, of my machines, depending on if somebody, a hacker, got access to my machine, maybe even an admin, made some change, whether it's a file or registry item, it would be listed here. So if I drill down, I can also run queries on change tracking. So the threat protection, and this is what I was talking about earlier. I just had a couple of new servers up and running, and I noticed that I got a suspicious authentication activity. So here you can see what it pretty much looks like. We'll give you the activity time, the environment, because I couldn't hook it up, and also the severity. So this is my resource that was attacked, and it gives me a breakdown on what happened. So the date and time, what it detected. So somebody tried to access my virtual machine. None of them succeeded, but they used accounts that were recognized. So these are some of the accounts that were checked, and you can see an IP. Sometimes it shows a computer name and the number of failed authentication attempts. So I know it wasn't me, because I'm not going to spend 81 times trying to. So they tried to brute force my virtual machine, and you can see some of the top accounts with the failed sign-in attempts that they tried. So that's handy to have, right? Remediation steps, pretty much the stuff that we already doing and should know. Always enforce strong passwords, so long, complex phrases. It's pretty much more secure. So ideally what you want in this kind of situation is to only allow access to this machine from specific networks, so specific IP addresses, and you can remediate it in that way. So one of the preview options for remediation is the logic app trigger. So where I can go and select or create a logic app if this happens again, and that will be triggered, and it could remediate that error. But non-listed. So pretty much a lot of options. I mean, I can go on and on with a lot of these items and options, but I thought I'd pick and choose a few that I think everybody needs. That's right there. I mean, I didn't do anything special other than select it and set it up. So some of the new things, well, maybe not so new. With Azure Sentinel, there's new connectors coming all the time, made available, third-party vendor to gather in that information. Things on the Microsoft 365 side, which is also cloud, insider risk management software. There's no excuse to not use MFA. It's pretty much free for Azure AD accounts, work and school accounts. Not Microsoft accounts yet. Azure AD Connect, cloud provisioning, improvements for advanced threat protection, the new stuff for containers and SQL in Security Center, working on new compliance for, and the ability, or still in a new preview, is Azure Firewall Manager, which allows you to pretty much create a centralized firewall for your entire network. So you can set up a hub-spoke virtual network with this firewall and apply NSG rules globally across your whole network. The ability to scan images, so containing images for vulnerabilities, and also threat protection for those of you that are using Azure Kubernetes. A lot of these are preview items, and I recommend that you try and see if it works for your environment. So things like the vulnerability assessments, extra regulatory compliance that came about and added, a lot of SQL, and what's nice for those of you that running app services is that you have the custom domain Azure App Service Managed certificates available that will auto-renew when they need to. Quick fixes for bulk resources, and also the threat protection for storage and malware protection screening. My tips is to always build with a security first approach and implement, don't be scared to implement new features and services. It's there for a reason. That's the reason Microsoft is keeping evolving new methods to counteract existing threats, reviewing your architecture on a regular basis, because what you had before. Maybe there's a better way to make it available, especially in the way of cloud, because there's no one way or one size fits all. It's pretty much scenario-based computing, as I'd say. You can have independent app service workloads, different virtual networks for different services, and always audit not just your governance, but pretty much everything. And consider changes fast. So that's pretty much it for me, and I'd like to leave you with this. You know, it's in Azure, everybody can do it. You just have to use it. So thank you for sitting in on the presentation. And I hope you guys learned something new. Thank you.